Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 25th of November 2023. I was going to do this as a live stream just because it was easier and I'm so behind today. Just reaching out to anyone who's able to come onto a live stream with me, like Matt sometimes does, Matt Bishop. He obviously probably in bed by now in Australia. If anyone can deputise for him at all, I know someone else, Jason Garinja, has offered to do so, but I can't get a hold of him. So if there's anyone out there that wants to just pop on and with the occasional live, kind of last minute where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do a live now, literally within like half an hour of going live. If you're able to do that and want to just kind of bounce ideas off me, but basically look at the comments and see what people are saying while I am delivering the content, as you've seen Matt do so ably. If you can do that, just contact me through somehow, I don't know, through Twitter maybe, or through the Facebook group, the Atypical Philosopher Facebook group, or on Discord or whatever. If you're able to do that, please let me know. Okay, let's go straight to the military aid segment, where I normally start. And here we have reporting that Germany is taking over as being the largest donor to Ukraine during the war. Now, of course, when this concerns the US as well, this is quite surprising because the US has given an awful lot of stuff. And I don't know how these figures work particularly, although some of the latest data is coming from as far back as sort of July, September. There are a good few months of a lot of movement where actually the US has given the least that they have in that time due to the issues with Congress, and countries like Germany, for example, have given more than they ever have done. So that could be why there is this. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's not competition, right? As long as everyone helps as much as possible. But I think this is newsworthy because at the beginning of the war, Germany were ridiculed for giving virtually nothing, for giving 5,000 helmets, and memes were created and whatnot. Anyway, the Ukrainian review here says the numbers speak for themselves. Germany becomes the largest donor to Ukraine during the war. But again, not sure, but that definitely works. Now, the Kiel Institute stats they're using go to July the 31st here. So you've got another 4 months of stats on top of that. And you can see there's a massive difference between Germany and the US, although the German stats need to take into account, or one needs to take into account, the EU, both military, humanitarian and financial aid given, because Germany are a massive contributor to that. I think maybe 30% of the budget or something like that. So that could be responsible for a closing of that gap to some large degree. Anyway, and again, this is to do with perceptions and accuracy as opposed to competitions between nations. Without the US, Ukraine will be screwed. They're being absolutely amazing. But anyway, we'll look into some of this data a little bit. So part of what Germany have done, which some people might not know about, is this idea of Ringtausch. So that's this kind of multilateral equipment exchange program designed to support Ukraine's war effort in the face of Russian aggression. In cooperation with Germany's European neighbours and NATO partners, Soviet-era heavy equipment is being transferred to Ukraine in exchange for surplus Western-made systems. Rheinmetall is taking, so that's the manufacturer, German manufacturer, is taking part in various Ringtausch exchanges involving the armed forces of Greece, the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Slovenia. So we look at that detail from the Oryx website, which is still functional, by the way, even though he's not doing it himself on Twitter and whatever. There are other people who are still doing the data. So this Ringtausch is interesting because there are countries who are, scare quotes, giving Ukraine weaponry or equipment that you might then think, oh, well done. Thanks Greece, or thanks Slovakia, or thanks Slovenia, or thanks Czechia. And it turns out that actually it's Germany that's giving the equipment. Because what happens is, for example, Czechia have given 14 Leopard 2A4s and one Buffel ARV armoured recovery vehicle in exchange for an unspecified number of T-72M1 MBT. So Czechia have been given 14 Leopard 2A4s and one Buffel ARV. And they have given a load of their T-72s, an unspecified amount of them, to Ukraine. And you might think, well done Czechia for giving them to Ukraine. Actually, that's well done Germany for giving Czechia 14 Leopard 2A4s so that Czechia can give a bunch of older Soviet-era tanks. And the same with Greece. Greece gave 40 BMP-1s, so these are old infantry fighting vehicles, and they got 40 Marder IFVs in exchange. So Greece are laughing all the way to the bank, really, and it's Germany that appear to be doing the heavy lifting in that exchange. And in fact, Greece, I don't think have done nearly enough. I think they've been a real problem. They've just not been forthcoming with military equipment, especially when they have a lot of Soviet-era equipment, S-300 missile air defense systems. Anyway, Slovakia gave 30 BMP-1s, not BVP, I don't know, BMP-1s to Ukraine, infantry fighting vehicles, and they got 15 Leopard 2A4 main battle tanks. I mean, that's an amazing exchange for Slovakia. They're like, yeah, thank you very much. Slovenia gave all those, the 28 M55Ss, so those are the old T-55s that have been actually significantly upgraded, so they're half decent by an Israeli company actually, and they got given 45 man-catty transport and water trucks for those older, somewhat obsolete tanks with regard to where their army is at. Again, that's all Germany, and then when you look at the Ukraine support tracker from Kiel Institute, which is always worth looking at, although this data is out of date now, it's July. Again, as I've mentioned, you can see that the US here has given an awful lot. If you go down, that is just over 60 billion there. They've given that much. Now, Germany here has given just over 20 billion. So they're 40 billion off. However, they've also funded all of this amount of probably, that amount of the EU donations. So that would put them somewhere up here in terms of all the types of donations. And this is, as I say, 4 months out of date. So where Germany have then been piling on loads of extra things since then, it might be comparable. I don't know that it is still with that they have overtaken the US, and the article in question here doesn't really go into the details. It just makes this assertion that the numbers speak for themselves. Germany becomes the largest donor, but actually they don't show that it's become the largest donor. Again, well done everyone. But I just think it's really interesting that Germany is playing this huge part, and there's been this sudden sea change, and I think there's been this realization within some of the powers in Europe that this is a much bigger threat to the EU and to European nations than ever thought before. And if we European nations, allied nations to Ukraine, if we don't win on a battlefield, then you lose in the information space. So this is more of a challenge, an existential challenge in a sense, because like the existence of our free and fair democracies are under threat due to Russian influence in a really significant way. And you can't hope to defeat that if Russia are to prevail on a battlefield with Ukraine. So defeating Russia on the battlefield means that there's likely to be a regime change and maybe a control or delete of Russia or something, whereby the threat of disinformation campaigns will be somewhat mitigated. So it's really massively in the interest of allied nations, particularly those close to Russia, geographically speaking, but basically all of European nations to challenge Russia for Ukraine to win the war. I think Germany might be realizing this and going, right, we need to do what the US was doing, which is bringing all the nations together. The US are looking like having difficult elections coming up. So we need to take control and also position the EU away from the US in terms of we are independent for the US. We're not just following along with the US. We are a big block of countries that can make our own decisions, and we'll work with the US. But Germany's taking that central positioning, and they've kind of rested off the spectre of the Second World War, where they're like, okay, German army is a bit of a controversial thing. Lots of people are a bit dubious about strong military force in Germany. They're like, okay, we're beyond that now. We're cool about that. Everyone else is cool about that. Let's start funding our defence in a way that's actually really beneficial for the EU, not just for Germany, and think about the geopolitical strategizing we need to be doing going forward. And I think this talks to that. I think this is really, really good news. I am worried about, so I have written a massive article, which I've told you about. It's a 16-minute article. This is not a small article. A Stoking division, how Putin is helping the rise of the right. And this is about how Putin is getting involved. As you can see here, it is a long article. So it's about Putin and Russia getting involved in the politics of Europe. And I think there is a challenge to the EU in terms of where the EU is going internally due to the far right in the EU is also Eurosceptic and is genuinely being funded and supported by Russia. And this helps to divide the EU and have it kind of fall apart. This will be a massive issue for global security and global stability going forward. Now, what I hope is when you see governments like Geert Wilders's PVV, or not that he's formed a government, he may not, it's looking like he won't be able to form a cabinet. But even if someone like the PVV got into government in the Netherlands, I hope there's enough old school political infrastructure below the level of the politicians that will not allow too many crazy things to happen. For example, like if some crazy politicians get in, they're still in charge of the army, and the army still has their strategies and their kind of the political arm of the army, where they're like, well, we haven't changed. So if you're going to get into rule our country and you're saying, no, we should not do this and we should not do this, we as the army are going to say, no, you need to do this, and I'm going to tell you why you need to do this. And here's all the intel that you've not had access to previously while you've been going on in your wingnut campaigning, right? Here is all the stuff that you don't know about that is super important and is why we need to keep continuing to support Ukraine, right? And I hope there's enough of that kind of structure underneath all the kind of politics at the top, which plays to public perceptions. It's the serious stuff, like your career civil servants and your career military personnel that are going to say, no, like, this is our expertise. We've been doing this all our lives. You can't just get into government and then change all this and then go all pro-Russian here on us, because that ain't gonna fly. And I hope that kind of stuff happens. Anyway, it's just interesting to see Germany completely change its approach to its military and to the Ukraine war, and really take a lead in this, and that's only good news for Ukraine. And obviously we need the US to be still pulling the strings in terms of getting global, implementing their global influence, but also we need Congress to pass that frickin' bill, yeah? Okay, so moving on. 2 launches of the NASAMS air defense system provided by Lithuania in November as part of their next package of defense assistance. So the Lithuanian leader is in Kiev at the moment. To Ukraine have already been put on combat duty, says the Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. That's really good news. These are probably the medium range air defense systems that can do a really good job. So the NASAMS, the Norwegian American Cooperation, it's a good piece of kit. Denmark has agreed to increase additional funding for a fund which finances support for Ukraine by 308 million euros in 2023 and 3.15 billion between 2025 and 2027. Again, 2 things. 1, awesome, brilliant, thank you, Denmark. And again, one of these slightly geographically close nations that feel the heat of this conflict more than others. But secondarily, this is about that messaging for long-term support over time. This is to 2027. So it's, no, I'm sorry, Putin. We are in this for the long haul. And here is evidence of that, because we are contractually obliging ourselves to support Ukraine for the long haul. And that will also work against any changes to the political landscape within Denmark, which is really super useful. So nations that have these issues with a change of government coming up that might be more pro-Russia, if they put something in place now for the future, then it can hopefully be untouched by a change in the political landscape in that country. And that's kind of what Biden wants to do, which is put that massive $106 billion package in place for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, and Indo-Pacific and the southern border, so that if there's a change in government in 2024, at least part of that annual budgeting is going to be untouched by a change in government. Right, Canada will transfer 11,000 assault rifles and 9 million rounds of small ammunition to Ukraine. Latvia will focus on the reconstruction of Chernihiv region. That's according to the Latvian president, who is there. Yeah, that's all good news. Here we have Azerbaijan donating this useful piece of equipment to Ukraine. It's a Revival P, an armored unmanned demining machine, which is already in use. The total value of humanitarian aid package from the former Soviet Union is $7.6 million. That's awesome that Azerbaijan, who is involved in a conflict with Armenia, and there's interesting geopolitical position with the West around that conflict, and Azerbaijan have been complaining that some Western nations have been supporting Armenia, such as France particularly. France has given a whole bunch of military equipment to Armenia. Armenia were previously supported more by Russia than Azerbaijan. So Russia were the peacekeepers, but they're kind of sort of on the side of Armenia. They have extricated themselves from the area, concentrating on other things, and you've now got a jostling as to who is supported and who is within the sphere of influence of the West, for example. I mean, it's a difficult conflict that's been taking place there, where there are analogues with Israel and Palestine, to be honest, where you've got Armenia as the kind of Christian, more Christian political entity taking some land in Nagorno-Karabakh, but Azerbaijan have said, well, that's ours by right, and then support for Armenia might have come more from their ethnic characteristics, I don't know. And then you've got Azerbaijan who say, no, we've actually properly got a right to that area. And then you've got all of the kind of hot mess that is, and how countries in the West perceive that and who they should side with. And it's just interesting dynamics going on there. Now, it looks like the Russian version of but it's great that they've given a bunch of equipment to Ukraine, and Armenia have interestingly helped themselves a little bit too. Not helped themselves; they've helped Ukraine. Looks like the Russian version of the MQ-8 Fire Scout. What's he talking about here? So, I showed you a video of Shoigu walking around a drone factory, and you had these helicopter drones, and they look pretty up and together, and that's a bit of a worry that Russia are, really appearing to be able to construct drones, and a lot of them, and have, pretty high-tech stuff going on. But this person says that looks like the MQ-8, which is, if you're thinking the Reaper is in that family of drones. Reaper's the MQ-9, isn't it? Likely to be able to provide similar capabilities as a Fire Scout, to likely include UHF, VHF voice communications relay, electrical, optical, infrared sensor package, a laser designator that enables the system to find tactical targets, track and designate targets, accurately provide targeting data to provide platforms, perform BDA, battle damage assessment, and situational awareness, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting data at the forward deployed warfighter. Likely similar characteristics to the Fire Scout: max airspeed 100 to 125 miles an hour, range 100 to 125 miles, 300 to 600 pound payload, and maximum flight time of 5 hours. So if that is similar to the MQ-8, and they are building a bunch of these, that is a concern for Ukraine. Right, and moving on. Iran supplies Russia with glide bombs, so not just the FAB 500 bombs or the 250 or the 1000 or whatever. The ISW reports that Iran are providing glide bombs that can fly at low altitudes and avoid detection by radars. Iran may also be preparing to transfer short-range ballistic missiles to Russia, which we've heard quite a lot about recently. This is a massive worry. So my position is all over the shop in terms of how happy or sad, if I'm going to be really simplistic, about how I feel about the war at the moment. On the one hand, we've seen a lack of territorial gain in a Ukrainian counteroffensive. But on the other hand, as I've said, there are many metrics where we can see that Ukraine have had huge success. And indeed, this massive drone attack last night into Ukraine without cruise missiles alongside that is probably as a result of the success of the Ukrainians in moving the Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, where they can't load their submarines and warships with cruise missiles. And so that is, Ukraine have done an amazing job of hitting Crimea. They've done an amazing job of degrading Russian equipment along the front lines. Just an incredible job. But the Russians have a lot of equipment, and they have a lot of support from Iran in terms of these kind of missiles. And so it is a bit of a worry going forward. So, okay, Ukraine have then upgraded massively their air defense network, and that is really good. But at the same time, Russia have upgraded their production of cruise missiles and Shahed type drones, which means that they are potentially matching the Ukrainians as they increase their air defenses. The Russians possibly increase their ability to do saturation wave attacks, and their stockpiling, and their manufacturing, and their importing. It is in other words, it's still a real big worry. Now, they failed, I think, with a massive wave last night, but imagine they had 70 cruise missiles on top of the 75 Shaheds that were sent into Russia. What damage that might have done. So Ukraine are in a much better position they were a year ago, but there are still huge challenges. And in my opinion, it's about the West just saying, okay, for goodness sake, we just give you everything. Like everything. Come on, guys. Everything now. Let's just stop this drip feed of stuff and realize that Ukraine prevailing allows the West and allied nations to prevail in the information space, geopolitically, strategically, economically as well. Okay, Latvian president arrives in Ukraine on an official visit. Edgars Rinkovits arrived in Ukraine on the 24th, visiting Kyiv and the site of the Russian atrocities in Chernihiv Oblast, Zelensky announced. That's good news. And we have had the Lithuanian Prime Minister arriving on a multi-day visit. The Baltic states being one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine's defense. If you look and this goes back to the data I was talking about earlier, as a percentage of GDP, and if you look at the defense budget as a percentage of GDP as well, the Baltic states are superb in their support for Ukraine. In fact, they're above the US in both of those metrics, I think, if I remember correctly. But they're small nations, so and you know why they're given so much, because they're right next door to Russia and are ex-Russian, states, if you like, former Russian states. So it's in their best interest to do this, but they are doing a lot. But as small states, there's only so much they can do. Ukraine and Lithuania have signed an agreement on technical and financial cooperation. The Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, has reported this simplifies the implementation of assistance projects to Ukraine from the side of Lithuania, in particular in terms of supply of various equipment, transfer of technologies, implementation of reforms on the way to the EU. So that's good from Lithuania. Dutch minister has said the far-right electoral win has me worried about support for Ukraine. Right, a couple of corrections from me. Correction number one, I said Pinochet the other day was from Argentina. It's the Argentinian junta that took control, and Pinochet was Chile. And when I said that at the time, I was like, no, Pinochet's Chile. But I didn't want to go and check, and I just said that, and I do apologise. Right. Second correction is actually possibly an important nuance here, which is that it's not that Geert Wilders, the new right-wing, I don't know what he is at the moment because he's not leader of. He would have to go into coalition. I don't think he's successfully get a coalition. But anyway, the person who got the most votes, if you like, or his party got the most votes in the elections in the Netherlands recently, I said he was pro-Russian. anti-Ukrainian, but actually, so loads of Dutch people reached out and spoke to me about that, and I got a whole spectrum of opinions on Holland. Sure, a couple of them were from Russian trolls, actually, interestingly. But loads of really interesting information. Thanks for all of that. It's why it's such an amazing community. He isn't necessarily pro-Russian, although he was seen very happily in the Russian Duma with Russian flags around him. So there's an argument to say he's pro-Ukraine, but he's just anti-escalation and anti-giving a load of weaponry to Ukraine. He supports them morally, but doesn't want the Netherlands to be part of this escalatory situation. I don't know that those two are easily separable, because I think that ends up being that position, that kind of is an appeasement position that ends up being pro-Russian. And you would only have that position if you weren't worried about Russia. Do you know what I mean? So I think if you're pro-Ukrainian in like, we'll have a chat about this. Yeah, I'm pro-Ukraine. I think what Russia have done is a bad thing. But you're like, but I'm not going to support weapons against Russia. You are effectively pro-Russian in my books, because you aren't pro-Ukrainian enough to let that worry you. You're like, if we're going to have some abstract conversation, I'm pro-Ukrainian. If that makes me seem like a better guy to you, then yeah, I'll be pro-Ukrainian. But when it matters, if you're saying, I'm not going to support Ukraine in tangible ways that allows their democratic sovereignty, like if you're a party that's all about freedom and you're not fighting for another country who is fighting for their own freedom, then you're not really about freedom. There's all sorts of strings attached. And so for those who rightfully said, yeah, I hear what you're saying about Geert Wilders, but actually I think it's a bit more nuanced. I would say, yeah, I get that. However, I still think I would define him, broadly speaking, as pro-Russian. Because actions speak louder than words. And unless he's got a really bloody good argument that doesn't sound like appeasement and non-escalation, which is appeasement, which I don't think flies. I don't think that's got any kind of rational basis, really. And unless he's got some other really good rationale for that position, he is, in my books, fairly pro-Russian. And the Dutch minister here, so sorry, that's a long-winded sidebar. Far-right electoral win has me worried about support for Ukraine. Dutch defense minister, so this is someone that you want to pay attention to because she's a defense minister and her job is to support Ukraine well, it's not her job. Her job is to devise defense strategy, and she's saying that she's concerned about Geert Wilders' victory. I think that is someone's opinion we should take into account. I am worried, despite what some who aren't necessarily pro Geert Wilders, but see him as someone else. I am still worried about his victory. Right, the Russian trace in the Polish trucker border blockade. So this is something I spoke about the other day. There was a piece of investigative journalism on the Guildhall website. That's a translation of the website. It's a European, or it might have even been Ukrainian website. But anyway, this is now in the Euromaidan press. So this is gaining. The idea that the Russians are behind the border blockades is gaining some traction now. And hopefully we'll see this turn up in the mainstream media going forward. I'd be interested, if you're Polish, can you let me know if there is any reporting of this within Poland? Is this all, how is it being seen? How is a blockade of the borders between Poland and Russia, and indeed Slovakia, Poland and Ukraine, and indeed Slovakia and Ukraine, being seen in those media landscapes? Please let me know. The organisers of the Polish trucker strike at the Ukrainian border have close ties to Russia. They supported Russia's occupation of Crimea, and some voted against condemning Russian war crimes. Good that is gaining traction. Let's see it in the mainstream media, please. Reuters, Ukraine faces LPG shortages over the Polish border blockade. The ongoing blockade by Polish protesters at Ukraine's border caused drops in motor vehicle gas LPG supplies, creating shortages at several gas stations, Reuters reported. So there are these knock-on effects. Yesterday there was a report that $400 million worth of you know, trade has been lost in this blockade. But this is huge. The border with Slovakia has been unblocked, according to the State Border Guard Service. So that's really good news, and long may that stay the case. So it looks like there is a solution there. Let's hope that there's a solution up into Poland. Ukraine has removed the list of international sponsors of war. 3 shipping companies from Greece have stopped transporting Russian oil and been removed from that list. So I reported that on those 3 shipping companies yesterday. So it's really interesting that actually in the same day, this then came out. Minerva Marine, Maris, and TMS Tankers. In fact, Mikey from Cambridge, I think, did a little bit of research when I posted stuff about that into like the connections. I was talking about a British ship or British owned ship nominally, and when you did the research, actually it was Russian and based out of Syria, and so much dark stuff going on around the world, and this whole area of Russian grain export and Russian oil export and gas export and the ghost ships and dark fleets, I think, is an area where there's all sorts of investigative journalism could bring up all sorts of information and data. Anyway, I digress. So this is on to Justin Trudeau. Interesting here. I'm not 100% sure as to what I feel about this because I don't know the data. Exactly. I don't know. Well, what am I talking about? Okay, so Justin Trudeau says his conservative rival, who's ahead in the polls, I think, is abandoning Ukraine under Trump's influence. So Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said his domestic political rival, the Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, was turning his back on Ukraine under the influence of Donald Trump, and that's according to Reuters on the 24th. Trudeau, elected for Canada's Liberal Party, criticised the Conservatives for voting against a bill to implement a free trade agreement with Ukraine. All 109 Conservative lawmakers in the House of Commons voted against the bill that gathered unanimous support from other parties in a preliminary vote on November 21st. So a real division where you got all the Conservatives voting against it and everyone else voting for it. But the details are quite interesting to this. I've actually boasted, said Trudeau, that it's not a political debate in Canada. All parties in Canada stand with Ukraine. And of course, that doesn't appear to be the case. So it's it's particularly troubling to see that suddenly the Conservative Party of Canada would choose not to stand with Ukraine on something that they need. Poilievre, whose party is leading in the polls in the 2025 elections, said he did not support the bill because it would force Ukraine to adopt a carbon tax. So part of that free trade agreement, and this is why I don't know the details, is that you can freely trade stuff with us as long as it hits it's probably not just the environment, it's probably, health and safety regulations and environmental regulations. But this is pretty normal. So when you have free trade agreements, they're all, it's not just completely free trade. There are things attached. So for example, when the UK was in the EU, there were really high regulatory burdens for good moral reasons on trade agreements that we were involved in. That meant that if you're going to freely trade your stuff, your widgets into the EU, we need to know they're not made with like slave labor, literally with slave labor, that you don't have kids' sweatshops making that stuff. If we know that that's being made by kids in a sweatshop, then you can't freely, our trade agreement won't cover those goods, right? So that's all pretty normal. Now, this could just be, so because they're trying to do this carbon tax situations to try and get carbon emissions sorted, Canada is saying, right, we're going to do free trade with, and this, I don't know the details, I'm speculating, but we're going to do a free trade deal with Ukraine, whereby we freely trade stuff. The thing is, if you in Canada have a high regulatory burden on the goods that you are exporting out, because you can't make stuff, we've made laws, you can't make stuff in this country without doing X, Y, and Z, or that there's going to be a carbon tax involved in this. Like, if you don't have the same for the goods being imported in a free trade agreement, So we're not going to put tariffs on any of this stuff going either way. But if you can import stuff that we could buy over here, but you don't have to adhere to the same regulatory burden over here, then you can make that stuff cheaper over there. And it means you can then undercut our own stuff over here. So it's absolutely normal in a free trade agreement that both sides would have to have, there would have to be a parity in how they get made. Because otherwise you are giving the advantage, the price advantage, to one side over the other. And you've just got a mismatch in regulation. So I think this is the Conservatives here just having a go at environmental legislation in general. Because I don't think having that as part of a free trade agreement is controversial. It has to be there. Because if you've got it here in your own country, you have to expect that from the importing country as well. As far as I would understand that, right? But therefore, this is more the Canadian Conservatives saying we are going to try and roll back environmental legislation, which, you know, if you go back in time with Harper's government, in the Conservative government under Harper in Canada, is absolutely what Canadian Conservatives are used to doing. You know, I've written articles when he was in charge on him and the stuff that he was up for doing. You think Canada, a lovely place with lovely green trees and forests and environment, but you know, the Conservatives over there have been fairly much up for you know, not being too pro environment, shall I say. And I'm sure I get lots of Canadian Conservatives having a go at me, but I just think I understand that. But Poilievre, whose party is leading the poll, says, I really think it speaks to how pathologically obsessed Trudeau is with the carbon tax that, while the knife is at the throat of the Ukrainians, he would use that to impose his carbon tax ideology on those poor people. That's really unfair way of doing that. They have to do that. If you've got that legislation here, you have to expect it over there, as I've said. I think this is a really disingenuous way of framing this, but that will speak to people who might not recognize how you do trade deals. The last thing they need is a carbon tax when they're trying to rebuild from war, from this illegal invasion by Russia. I just think this is an excuse to I mean, you could kind of see that point, but in that case, don't do a free trade deal with them. You know, yeah. Standing Prime Minister voiced scepticism of that justification. To see the Conservative Party, says Trudeau, of Canada decide not to support Ukraine with something they need with the absurd excuse that it's because Ukraine is going to put a price on pollution is ridiculous. So on and so forth. So that I'm sure will rumble on, but it's a shame there isn't unanimity in that, to be perfectly honest. Right, and finally, the Armenian Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, has accused Russia of failing to deliver weapons for which Yerevan, so it's the capital of Armenia, has already paid. Again, talking to this idea of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia being on the side of Armenia traditionally, or they were peacekeepers between the two, but they would provide equipment to Armenia. Well, now, Armenia's paid for equipment, and they're not getting that equipment. The head of the government did not specify the amount in question, but said that Russia has problems with non-fulfillment of arms contracts. Now, the question is, obviously, is this done on purpose? As in, yeah, we're taking your money and we're not going to give you stuff because we don't like your direction you're going in. Or is it, yeah, we haven't given you that stuff because we need it all ourselves. Like, those T-90 tanks we promised you, I know you paid for them, but man, we need them on the front line. So you'll get them, but in about 3 years. Hope you don't mind. Which of those two issues is it? The latter, well, neither of them neither of those is implausible. But I wonder if it is because they desperately need. I can't see them fulfilling hardly any contracts abroad in terms of military equipment, possibly with the exception of Iran, because they are getting such important stuff back from Iran. But nevertheless, we shall see, I guess. And just to remind you, I know I've already said this, but check out my article, see what you think. Even if you are on the right, this is not to say that the issues that, as I said, and I actually went and made an addendum to this based on a comment from one of you guys out there, so thanks for this. I made an addendum to this saying what's discussed here is not to detract from these issues, immigration, etc., to pretend they don't exist. It's not to deny that there are organic political movements motivated by a perceived need to deal with such issues. And yet, one thread that connects almost all of these places can be traced all the way back to the Kremlin. So, there are many reasons for all of these issues in the countries of the EU that the right are saying, right, this is an issue and we need to sort it out. But when you have Putin then hijacking those movements, funding the most extreme iterations of those movements, and certainly if they're not funding, then they are in the information space, prodding, probing, provoking, stirring that pot, poking that hornet's nest to give real division in terms of far right ultra nationalism. When Russia is doing that, and they're doing it in every single country in Europe, pretty much, we need to take notice. And when I can just very easily, I mean, it took me some time to write this, but when I can very easily just list virtually every country in Europe, well, just the whole load of them, and said, I could go on, but you get the point. And just show the shift in the far right, and then show how Russia are supporting that and behind a lot of that movement. This is a worry, and we need to wake up. Now, you may be aligned with that political positioning, but just be wary that your positioning may be hijacked by Russia for reasons that aren't for the benefit of your country, but that are for the benefit of Russia. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that out there. Thank you for watching. Please take care. And please like, subscribe, and share, and all the stuff I always say, but I know my videos aren't for everyone. It's me banging on in the corner like some rabid nut job. And I know people aren't a fan of that all the time, but I do think the YouTube algorithms just do not favour my channel. And it when it was growing, I don't really mind. I'm all right, thanks, Jack. All that kind of stuff. But when you see it like real grind off there to very little growth in recent times, you're thinking, yeah, YouTube hate me. So if you can share videos, that'd be great. All that kind of stuff. Thank you. Take care.